Shuttle Discovery is poised to launch a Venus probe later today. Suspected neo-Nazi arms cache uncovered in Washington, D.C. Christians and Muslims observe Arab League truce in Lebanon. Good morning. Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. All is going smoothly at the Kennedy Space Center for today's launch of Space Shuttle Atlantis, even the Cape's tricky weather.
The weather forecast for launch time continues to look favorable. The chance of a crosswind violation at the shuttle landing facility now is under 10%.
This is Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Ho-hum, two short words to describe the flawless nature of the countdown toward launch of Shuttle Atlantis. NASA Administrator-to-be Richard Truly told reporters,
I know it may have been a little slow for you here in the last couple of days because things are quiet, but I love it.
4 men and 1 woman will fly away in a few hours if all continues to go well. 6 hours after that, they'll deploy the Magellan Venus Mapping Probe from the cargo bay, an event long awaited by NASA's Space Science Administrator, Leonard Fisk.
Magellan marks the resurgence of the U.S. planetary program. We had a planetary program that was in danger of being an also-ran.
The U.S. has mounted no planetary expeditions in over a decade, and Magellan marks the first time a planetary spacecraft has ever been carried aloft in the shuttle. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Time on the roundup, 1.5 minutes past the hour.
CBS News, I'm Mike Pulsifer. All is ready for today's space shuttle launch. We get the latest from Frank Setapani at the Kennedy Space Center.
With less than 90 minutes to go before launch time, the countdown continues to move along without a hitch. Next on the schedule is a built-in hour and 10-minute hold period. After that, the clock starts up again, and no one is more anxious to get the shuttle off on time than NASA Science Chief Leonard Fisk. The Magellan Venus probe Atlantis will launch tonight could unlock some of the neighbor planet's darkest secrets.
We have a surface temperature of 900 degrees. It rains sulfuric acid. And you say, why is that? Why did one planet, which is like the Earth, develop into a hospitable place, and Venus develop into an inhospitable place?
By learning the geological history of Venus, scientists could find out why two basically similar planets are so strikingly different. Frank Setapani, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller.
It's been 11 years since NASA has launched an interplanetary spacecraft, and the hopes and dreams of many scientists and ordinary people are riding on it.
This is Frank Setapani at the Kennedy Space Center. The countdown, flawless to this point, stands at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. In about 15 minutes, the shuttle's ground launch sequence kicks in. Minutes after that, shuttle pilot Ronald Graby will start up the craft's auxiliary power units and the solid rocket booster ignition systems. NASA's Hugh Harris says a critical period in the launch sequence comes in the final 31 seconds.
After 31 seconds, any unplanned hold would result in an automatic cutoff of the countdown and a recycle to the T-minus 20-minute point. Because of the short launch window today, that would result in scrubbing today's launch.
The scheduled deployment tonight of the Magellan Venus probe requires a launch no earlier than 2:24 Eastern Time. Approaching darkness at emergency landing sites in Africa rules out a launch anytime after 2:47. The weather is perfect, and NASA says everything's a go for now. Frank Setapani, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
News special report, the flight of Atlantis at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News. Almost, but not quite. Launch countdown sequence for the last couple of days that NASA folks have been calling among the most perfect and glitch-free ever. They got right up to the last few minutes before liftoff, and there was a report from a range safety officer that one of their ground-based computers is down. It is still down, and they are still working on the problem. The problem right now is that even though they have picked up the count and they are proceeding with the countdown clock now about 6 minutes and 20 seconds toward launch, they will have to be scrub the flight for the day if they can't get that computer problem fixed before they get down to about the 30-second mark. So everything is proceeding while they furiously work on this ground computer problem, a safety tracking computer that is essential to the flight. This has been a CBS News special report, the flight of Atlantis, waiting at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News. This is a CBS News special report, the flight of Atlantis at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Christopher Glenn. Well, they got it fixed. A ground-based computer used in tracking the space shuttle as it roars away into orbit malfunctioned and went down about a half an hour ago, and so as a result, before they got that fixed, we were about 5 minutes late getting this launch underway. The launch is due now in about a minute and a half. The crew has been strapped inside for some time, awaiting their liftoff. The commander, Dave Walker, the pilot, Ron Graby, and mission specialist Norm Thagard, Mary Cleve, and Mark Lee. Lee's the only rookie, and Cleve becomes the first woman in space since the Challenger disaster. This is the fourth flight since the return to space, and probably from a payload standpoint, the most exciting. In the cargo bay is a $500 million Magellan radar mapping spacecraft, which Lee and Cleve are going to deploy some 6 hours after launch, and an hour after that, Magellan's own onboard rocket will be fired, starting it on its 15-month voyage to Earth's mysterious space neighbor Venus, which will orbit for 8 months, sending back images of 90% of the cloudy planet's surface. It's been a long time coming. The U.S. space program hasn't launched a planetary expedition in over a decade, not to mention this is the first time a planetary probe has ever been carried in the shuttle. Let's go to NASA's commentator Hugh Harris now for the final half minute or so of what was, up until the last few minutes, one of the most trouble-free countdowns since the shuttle flights began.
We're at T-minus 31 seconds and standing by to hear what the problem is.
We're going to have to recommend a recycle here. It looks like the pump is actually down.
A problem with the pump? That may be one of the auxiliary power units.
Launch Director, SP, is there anything else we can look at here before we go to a recycle? Pump, anything else?
Negative, we've lost research on this engine. We're out of limits. We're out of engine ready.
Okay, NTD, let's recycle. And this Launch Director, CPOP, the condition we're in right now, does it present any safety problems, or is this a standard recycle for us?
This is CPOP. This is a standard recycle, no safety problems.
Okay,
so Launch Director
we can try at this
Bob
point,
Seek recommending a recycle to a previous point in the countdown sequence.
Okay,
Try to get
TLS,
this problem fixed. This one's aboard the launch vehicle itself.
And NTD 212, we're going to go ahead and clear our SPCs.
Copy.
Launch Director Bob Seek telling the NASA Test Director that he has a go to cut off and recycle. At this point, there would not be enough time to recycle and launch today. The orbiter access arm being placed back into position against the orbiter to allow the crew to egress at the proper time. However, there is no problem with the recycle at this time. There's no danger to the crew.
Perform AP, you shut down.
Well, there you have it. They're very short windows, dictated by the needs of that Magellan Venus probe. And apparently they are not going to be able to make it before that window closes for the day. We're still waiting the official and final word on that, but we can see, even from our position at the press site, some 3 miles away from the launch pad, that the retractable arm through which the astronauts enter the spacecraft high above the ground is being swung back into place. And apparently they're going to open the hatch, and that's going to be it for today. Let's listen to a little more of NASA and see what we can find out from there.
Our 31-second point, they'll be going back to T-minus 20.
Hugh Harris, the commentator, saying they're going to go back to T-minus 20 in the countdown sequence. That's T-minus 20 minutes. And that would definitely put them out of range of today's window. But we still have not gotten the final word from Mission Control that the launch has been scrubbed for today, so we're standing by for what word they do have to pass for us. Nothing on the loop right now. It is a great disappointment. This had been loudly proclaimed one of the most perfect countdown sequences that NASA has ever had for a space shuttle flight.
The test team going through the process of recycling now from the launch configuration. The countdown for launch of STS-30 and the Magellan spacecraft to Venus halted at just 31 seconds prior to launch. Problem with the recirculation pump is what has been mentioned. We're standing by to hear more information on the problem which occurred. the gaseous oxygen vent arm or beanie cap being replaced on top of the external tank to carry away any vapors boiling off from that tank.
TPC mode 5 switch to standby.
Well, it would appear as if we are not going to get flying today with Space Shuttle Atlantis.
PLC, power distribution, essential bus source.
Resume with the scheduled liftoff.
Fuel cell 1, 2, and 3 switches to off.
Unsuccessful troubleshooting, but how they are going to handle that, we don't know. We're trying to figure it out. Listening to Mission Control and hearing what they have to say, but so far, commentator Hugh Harris has not provided us with any layman's information. Most of this cabin-to-ground chatter and chatter around the NASA communications loop itself has been in those acronyms and was impossible to decipher technological terms that they use.
CGSS, OTC. CGSS verifies OA is extended and locked. Copy.
You're listening to live coverage of what was supposed to have been the launch of Atlantis on the CBS radio network.
CBS News, I'm Mike Pulsifer. No launch today for Space Shuttle Atlantis.
At this point, there would not be enough time to recycle and launch today.
NASA's Hugh Harris. More from Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center.
It seemed too good to be true, and it was. A perfect launch countdown sequence falling apart piece by piece as last-minute problems developed. First, a ground-based computer essential to the launch phase failed, forcing about a 5-minute delay in the launch time. And then with just 31 seconds to go, computers shut off the count. NASA commentator Hugh Harris searched for the reason.
We're standing by. We have heard that there's a recirculation pump problem that caused us to be outside the limits of the launch commit criteria. However, have not had an explanation of exactly what happened.
And that's where it stands now. Troubleshooting still going on to find the exact cause of the glitch. At any rate, the launch of Atlantis and the Venus-bound spacecraft that was to have been deployed later today is off for at least 24 hours. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Mobil Oil issued a statement today saying it's pulling out of southern Africa, selling its operations in the region to a South Africa-based company. Representative Mickey Leland, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, welcomes the move.
This is another step in a progressive way for the American business interests to show that they are really sensitive about the humanity of the people who suffer so badly in South Africa.
Mobil says the same.
News time, 3 o'clock. CBS News, this is David Jackson. Smooth as glass, a boring countdown, picture perfect all the way, and scrubbed. That's the Shuttle Atlantis story, and CBS News' correspondent Frank Sedapani fills us in from the launch site.
The NASA management team, engineers, and test conductors are scheduled to meet at this hour for a brainstorming session to try to determine the nature of the technical problem that forced the space agency to scrub today's launch. NASA spokesman Hugh Harris says before they can fix the problem, they have to find it.
We know that there was a problem with the recirculation pump system on engine number 1. However, whether it's really related to the pump, whether it's the ground electrical power source, whether it's a controller, whether it's a sensor, is really not known.
The earliest the launch could be rescheduled is mid-afternoon tomorrow, and NASA isn't closing that option. But it all depends on locating the source of the trouble and correcting it. No announcement on a new launch date is expected before early this evening. Frank Sedapani, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, this is David Jackson. Space Shuttle set back at Cape Canaveral. The countdown for Atlantis launch looked great until there were just 31 seconds left on the clock. Then an engine pump problem shut the whole operation down. Later, a vapor cloud was seen around the rocket. When to launch now? NASA's Bob Casey says it all depends what the experts find.
Sunday morning, we hope to get the team back together and see if we have indeed isolated them and what the fix is. If the fix is a simple thing for both of these, we could maintain an opportunity to go on Monday afternoon.
The timing of this particular shuttle launch is critical. One of its missions launches a space probe toward Venus. To do that, the shuttle has to be at a very precise point in space. So for now, it looks like launch Monday at the earliest.
From ABC News, I'm Bill Stoller. And from the countdown in about 8 hours, prepare the Space Shuttle Atlantis for another launch attempt on Thursday afternoon. NASA thinks it now has repaired the problems that called off the launch last Friday with 31 seconds on the clock. They have till month's end to carry the space probe Magellan up on its way to Venus.
Tens of thousands of democracy marchers defy Chinese authorities. Weather permitting, NASA will try again to launch Shuttle Atlantis. Florida executes convicted child killer. Good morning, Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. NASA will make a second try today to launch Shuttle Atlantis. Frank Sedapani is at the Kennedy Space Center.
It's raining on the launch pad, but NASA's George Diller says the Space Shuttle Atlantis is just about fueled up and ready to go, weather permitting.
The countdown continues to go smoothly. Like the countdown last Friday, absolutely nothing is amiss.
While the rain falling now could actually help wash away any ice that formed on the shuttle overnight, rain and cloud cover could pose a safety problem at launch time. NASA's Dave Drackler says it's something the shuttle crew will hear about after it wakes up in less than an hour.
After breakfast, they'll be receiving a weather briefing, and then they'll begin the process of putting on their flight suits and flight equipment in preparation for heading out to the launch pad about 10:33 this morning.
If the weather cooperates, the shuttle will lift off about 3.5 hours after that on a mission to send a Magellan spacecraft to map as much as 90% of the planet Venus.
I'm Bill Lynch. Less than 2 hours now before the scheduled launch of a repaired Shuttle Atlantis, and local officials report the smallest crowd of spectators they can recall on nearby beaches. Frank Sedapani is covering the countdown.
After last week's dress rehearsal, the Atlantis shuttle crew is going through its routine at a brisk pace. Mission Commander David Walker is busy checking out systems and communications with NASA officials in Houston and here at the Kennedy Space Center.
CDR, how do you read? Read for loud and clear, CDR. How me? You're loud and clear. Good morning. And good morning to you. Got a good ship out there today. We think so, too.
Spokesman Hugh Harris says odds the weather will hold up still stand at 60-40.
We're hoping that the clouds will move toward the west and get out of the area here of the Kennedy Space Center in time for an on-time liftoff.
But the same easterly wind that's moving troublesome clouds out of the way could make an emergency return too dangerous if it kicks up too much and again delay the launch. Frank Sedapani, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, I'm Dick Reeves. At the Kennedy Space Center, they're ready.
Houston, Atlantis, MS3, you're loud and clear.
Roger, you're also loud and clear, Mary. Y'all have a good flight.
Thank you, Frank. We intend to.
The once-delayed scheduled launch of the Shuttle Atlantis is 48 minutes away. Frank Sedapani's at the Cape. Frank, go or no go?
Dick, it's a go at this point. It would seem the crew is in its cabin. The cabin hatch is closed, and almost everything is checking out the way it should on the orbiter and on the ground. The weather, though, is still a question mark. What clouds there are don't seem overly threatening, but the wind is still very much a concern. A 12-knot crosswind would make an emergency landing at the Cape too risky to attempt. They've been dancing on that all day. Right now, the latest we hear is they have a 14-knot wind. NASA is, however, encouraged at the low level of dangerous wind shear activity, and all it needs for a successful launch is about 1 minute of good weather.
The launch window this time 64 minutes, last week 23 minutes, so they do have some time to wait out the weather.
That is true. As far as mechanical problems are concerned, nothing major. There has been a small problem with a water spray boiler. They use that to cool the shuttle's auxiliary power units. That boiler was too cold. They say that's not a serious problem. They're working on it. They would rather have it fixed.
update. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The countdown for Space Shuttle Atlantis is in a planned hold with the clock reading 9 minutes until launch, but the launch team has extended that hold for an indefinite amount of time, waiting for unacceptable weather conditions to improve. They hope they will improve. Currently, there are violations of the launch weather constraints regarding both the cloud cover and the strength of the crosswinds blowing across the emergency landing strip that the shuttle would use in the event that there is an emergency just a few minutes after launch and they have to come back here to make an emergency landing. The window today, the amount of time available for launch, is rather long, 64 minutes, so they can do some waiting. There is no telling when they might come out of this hold. The place that in the countdown where they are right now is a good one to stop and pause because they haven't started some of the critical systems aboard the orbiter and the launch vehicle that would require them to set back the clock or perhaps even delay the flight for a day. So right at the moment, we're waiting, and the launch team and the shuttle crew are waiting for the weather to improve for the launch of Shuttle Atlantis. Shuttle update at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. After 12 with the weather at the Kennedy Space Center as the Shuttle Atlantis awaits the final go for liftoff. Christopher Glenn reports live from the Cape.
Patience, the watchword as Shuttle Atlantis sits on the launch pad. Systems ready, crew ready, weather not ready. The countdown had proceeded to a built-in hold point just 9 minutes before launch time when it was decided to extend that hold indefinitely. Both cloud cover and crosswinds are out of bounds for launch right now, and Weather Officer Dave Thurston says,
at this time, all we can do is hope for a change. We need a break in the clouds, and unfortunately, I can't give you a prediction on that.
Now, there is a 64-minute launch period today, but the launch team is now talking about needing 20 minutes after the count resumes to be able to go. So, figuring it out, that means the latest possible launch time today would be about 32 minutes past the hour. So far, no indications of when the count will resume, hoping for a change in the weather. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
The verdict...
The flight of Atlantis. I'm Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It's a squeaker, but there will be a try at launching Space Shuttle Atlantis less than 2 minutes from now, just about at the end of the 1 hour, 4 minute launch window for today. The countdown clock, which was stopped at 9 minutes to launch for almost an hour and then stopped again at 5 minutes to launch, was restarted about 3 minutes ago. No mechanical problems this time, as was the case last Friday. It was the weather, growling clouds and crosswinds out of line with the safety rules for blastoff. And after waiting and waiting and waiting, those conditions finally did improve enough for them to restart the countdown clocks. If there should be another delay at this point, the launch would be off for at least 24 hours because they have to go back in the countdown procedure and pick it up at a different point, and there's just not enough time left in the launch window for today. Last Friday, as you recall, there was some mechanical problems, a short circuit in a fuel system pump that caused computers to stop the launch procedure with just 31 seconds left to go. Those repairs were made. They were simple but very time-consuming, and that was the reason for the lengthy 6-day delay that we did see. The crew, Commander Dave Walker and pilot Ron Gravy, mission specialist Norm Thagard, Mary Cleve, and Mark Lee, all shuttle veterans except Lee. Cleve is the first woman to fly since the Challenger disaster. Not many seconds left now until Atlantis heads out. Let's join NASA launch commentator Hugh Harris.
T-minus 21 seconds. The SRB nozzle gimbal profile underway. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6. We have main engine start. 2, 1, 0. And liftoff. Planetary science begins.
There they go.
Here's the tower.
The shuttle is past the tower. The usual bright orange flames streaking out behind it, already beginning its roll program, bending down out over the Atlantic. And climbing into what is now a clear blue Florida sky after being cloudy all day long. Weather conditions just improving within the last few minutes or so. Shuttle Atlantis, carrying its 4-man, 1-woman crew, heading up into the sky, streaking out. An important mission carrying the Magellan Venus probe, which will radar map perhaps 90% of the planet's surface. It will be deployed about 6 hours from now.
Atlantis 2 miles downrange.
Atlantis moving still straight up, practically as we see it from our vantage point. Moving away. Mission control not reporting any problems at this moment.
Up to 104% performance. Atlantis velocity now 1,500 feet per second.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
Go at throttle up the call. After throttling down to reduce vibration, they throttle back up at this point. And of course, as we all remember, that was the point at which the Challenger disaster occurred.
Feet per second. Altitude 10 nautical miles.
Today, however, through that critical moment and awaiting the separation of the solid rocket boosters in just about 25 seconds or so from now.
This is Mission Control. All APUs looking good. 3 engines at 104%.
Normal calls from Mission Control, which at this point has shifted over to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The personnel here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida are responsible only until the shuttle is away and has cleared the tower, and then control automatically shifts over there. SRB SEP, solid rocket booster separation, should be coming up at any moment now. There it is. Looks good on the video monitors that we can see.
This is Mission Control. SRB SEP confirmed. Velocity 4,300 feet per second. Atlantis downrange 35 nautical miles at an altitude of 30 nautical miles. 3 engines all looking good at 104%.
So now, with the solid fuel boosters burned out and jettisoned from the launch vehicle, the most critical danger point of the mission has been passed. Atlantis' 3 main engines are still burning furiously. It'll be another 6 minutes or so before the last drop of the 500,000 gallons of rocket fuel in the external tank has burned away, and they can write the end to the powered phase of the flight. The mission for Dave Walker and Ron Graby, Norm Thagard, Mary Cleve, and Mark Lee scheduled to last 4 days, 56 minutes. Landing is scheduled on the vast, flat, dry lakebed runway at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The main event, deployment of the Magellan spacecraft to Venus, about 6 hours from now. Right now, as they continue to thunder toward orbit, all is looking well after a tenuous countdown, but a very smooth liftoff. This has been a CBS News special report, the flight of Atlantis. At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
CBS News. I'm Mike Moss. A federal court jury in Washington has returned guilty verdicts on 3 of the 12 criminal counts against fired White House aide Oliver North. CBS News reporter Linda Tyra is at the federal courthouse in Washington with the latest. Linda?
Mike, the former White House aide was found guilty of obstructing Congress, altering and destroying documents, and receiving an illegal gratuity that was a security system at his home. The 3 counts combined carry a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison and $750,000 in fines. If North had been convicted of all 12 counts, he could have faced 60 years in prison and $3 million in fines. The jury found North innocent of 5 counts of lying to and obstructing Congress. It also found him innocent of 2 counts of lying to the Attorney General and obstructing the Attorney General's investigation. Also, he was acquitted of illegally converting travelers' checks for his own use. And he was acquitted of conspiring to defraud the IRS by using a tax-exempt organization to solicit and raise money to buy weapons for the Contras.
After the verdicts were returned, North left the courthouse, got into a van with shaded windows, and was driven away through a small crowd of supporters who held "We Love You" signs and cheered the convicted felon with "Ollie, Ollie." There was no comment by North to the returned verdicts by the jury. President Bush told that the North jury had reached a verdict in the Iran-Contra case, had broken his silence, and said that he did not arrange a deal with Honduras to help Nicaragua's rebels during the time that direct American aid to the Contras was banned by Congress.
There was no quid pro quo. Everybody that attended the meeting says there was no quid
pro quo. And for those who suggest there was, the onus is on them.
The Space Shuttle Atlantis now is on its way into orbit, roaring off the launch pad just about an hour behind schedule. CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida with the story. Chris?
It was close, but they made it. With just a few minutes left in the available launch period for the day, Shuttle Atlantis went thundering away.
Have main engine start. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Planetary science begins as Atlantis clears the tower.
No mechanical problems this time, as was the case last Friday when the launch was scrubbed with just 31 seconds left to go. It was the weather that held things up, a thick cloud cover outside of launch constraints like crosswinds that were too strong. But finally conditions improved enough and they were able quickly to fly away. The crew, Dave Walker, Ron Graby, Norm Thagard, Mary Cleve, and Mark Lee will fly a 4-day mission. The major task just 6 hours from now, deployment of the Magellan probe to Venus, a spacecraft that will radar map 90% of the planet. All well at this point aboard Atlantis. I'm Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, I'm Dick Reeves. The Atlantis shuttle has been launched. Takeoff from the Kennedy Space Center more than an hour ago. Christopher Glenn is there. What's next on the flight menu?
Well, Dick, all of the critical operations of the flight have gone off without problems so far. After that 1-hour delay waiting for the weather to improve, everything just clicked into place, and once the launch rockets were spent and jettisoned, they fired up their onboard engines to tweak up to a circular orbit about 160 miles high, and about 10 minutes from now, they'll open the payload bay doors and start making preparations for deployment of the long-delayed Magellan spacecraft to Venus, 5 hours or so from now.
Christopher Glenn reporting from the Kennedy Space Center.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. Go this afternoon for the launch of the shuttle Atlantis, but finally it was go.
10, we have a go for main engine start. 7, 6, we have main engine start. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
After a week's delay, the Atlantis crew headed into space to deploy the Magellan space probe to Venus. Launch director Bob Seek breathed a sigh of relief.
I'm an optimist when it comes to the weather, and being a native of living in Florida many years, it does change if you can just wait long enough.
All those California voters who said yes last November to Proposition 103 won a victory today in the state Supreme Court. The court upheld most of the proposition, which calls for a 20% rollback in auto and property insurance rates.
CBS News, this is David Jackson. Flying high at last, in orbit, scheduled to launch the Magellan space probe toward Venus in about 3 hours. It was a long time getting away. Last week's mechanical problems, today's iffy weather. Launch director Bob Seek says it was a rough countdown, but not the worst he's seen.
We've had tougher launch counts. Tough launch counts are ones where you're dealing with technical problems, one coming on top of another one before you've had the opportunity to totally resolve the first ones. That's the kind of thing that drains the test team, so to speak. And all that does is demand a lot of patience, and we learned that in this business.
Atlantis is scheduled to spend 4 days in space before coming back to Edwards Air Force Base, California.
A split decision for Ollie North. After being kept on the ground for an extra hour due to poor weather, the Space Shuttle Atlantis successfully took off today, carrying with it the 7,600-pound Magellan satellite. If all goes as planned, the shuttle will send Magellan on its 15-month journey to Venus in around 2 hours. More from correspondent Jay Barbary.
Magellan is assigned to survey 70 to 90% of Venus's landscape, and the results could help scientists understand our planet. Some scientists believe Venus was once an Earth-like place. It may have had oceans before warming similar to the greenhouse effect turned it into a dead planet. Most feel the same thing won't happen here, but what they learned from Magellan's visit to Venus could help them make sure it doesn't.
Atlantis is due to stay in space 4 days. The jury says guilty and not guilty to Oliver North, and a victory for consumers in California. With Mutual PM, I'm Steve Futterman. The Space Shuttle Atlantis is due to launch a $550 million Magellan satellite on a 15-month trip to Venus. It's the first U.S. planetary probe since 1978. This is Mutual PM.
Six minutes, 45 seconds now before the deploy of Magellan. Shuttle Atlantis now just north of Hawaii over the Pacific Ocean. Orbit number 5. Just under 6.5 minutes now to deploy time for Magellan. The Magellan Venus probe is actually mated to the inertial upper stage. The inertial upper stage is a two-stage solid rocket motor booster, which, when completed with both of its burns, will have placed the Magellan spacecraft on its orbit to Venus. And at that point, the usefulness of the IUS is over, and Magellan will continue on its way by itself. IUS is the same booster used to place the TDRS tracking and data relay satellite into geosynchronous orbit, as was done on STS-6, STS-26, and the most recently STS-29. 5 minutes and 20 seconds until deploy. Really haven't heard anything from the crew on their activities, but we have been getting data in Sunnyvale, which is tracking the IUS and Magellan, and that data is being relayed to us through Brian Welch in Mission Control. Everything in the procedures for the deploy have been going very smoothly, and in fact some slightly ahead of schedule. No problems to report with any of the spacecraft involved. The crew not reporting any problems that would cause a delay in the deployment. Orbiter Atlantis over the Pacific Ocean just north of Hawaii, coming up to the deploy of the Magellan spacecraft from the payload bay in just over 4 minutes from now. Stay with us here on Dial-a-Shuttle. Magellan is the first planetary probe to be launched by the United States in 11 years. And it is also the first planetary probe to be deployed from a shuttle. The last time the U.S. launched a planetary probe, it was in 1978, and that was Pioneer Venus. That was also a Venus orbiter, but it had a lower resolution mapping Venus than Magellan will have. Magellan to cover over 90% of the surface. Control Houston, 3.5 minutes now before the deploy of Magellan. All still going very well here in the control center in Houston and at the satellite control facility at Sunnyvale and at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where 3 teams of flight controllers are watching their data carefully. No systems anomalies to report at this point in the deploy countdown. The deploy will take place due south of California in direct line of sight of Goldstone, one of the primary 3 antenna stations of the Deep Space Network. Magellan will leave Atlantis within line of sight of Goldstone, which is hardwired to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The other 2 antennas at Madrid and Canberra in the Deep Space Network maintain satellite links to the United States and to the control center at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Magellan will be the 6th spacecraft the United States has sent to study Venus. The first to arrive there was Mariner 2 in 1962. It measured the temperature of the surface of Venus and determined that there was no magnetic field there. The Soviet Union has sent 15 probes to Venus, including radar mapping missions. Balloons have been let loose in the upper atmosphere, and Venera landers have photographed the surface before heat and pressure ultimately destroyed those probes. In 1967, the U.S. probe Mariner 5 flew by the planet, and in 1973, Mariner 10 returned the first television pictures of Venus. Pioneers 12 and 13, the last planetary probes launched by the United States, took pictures and returned scientific data in 1978. Pioneer 13 released 4 atmospheric entry probes into the upper atmosphere of Venus and returned data from the atmosphere and the surface. It also verified the presence of sulfuric acid in the clouds of the Venusian atmosphere.
Coming up on 1 minute to deploy. Deployment of Magellan proceeding very smoothly. 1 minute now to deployment of that spacecraft. We are not receiving any word on the data that's being received by Sunnyvale, but of course we do assume that everything is working normally, as it has been for all the rest of the flight. Deploy 40 seconds now to deploy of Magellan and the IUS booster from the payload bay. 30 seconds.
Magellan. Control Houston, 25 seconds remaining before the deploy. The Guidance Navigation Control Officer reports good attitude, good rates aboard the Atlantis, which will provide a stable platform for the launch of Magellan.
10 seconds. 5, 2, 1, 0. Standing by for word on the deploy.
Magellan is deployed.
And you heard it.
That, Atlantis.
Magellan spacecraft has been deployed from the orbiter bay of Atlantis successfully, no problems. And Magellan is now on its way to Venus.
This is Mission Control Houston, Commander Dave Walker aboard Atlantis, confirming Magellan is deployed and on the way to Venus. Deploy took place at about 6 hours, 14 minutes, and 20 seconds mission elapsed time.
In about 15 minutes, the crew of Atlantis will maneuver Atlantis away from the Magellan and IUS spacecraft by firing both of the OMS engines. This will take them into a 175 by 160 nautical mile orbit, and this moves the shuttle away from the Magellan so that the IUS can perform the first of its solid rocket motor burns to begin the Magellan's trip, 15-month trip to the planet of Venus. Orbiter Atlantis on orbit number 5, southwest of Baja California. The deployment of the Magellan IUS spacecraft coming successfully at mission elapsed time of 6:14.
Control on quiet here and on the internal communications loops linking the Mission Control Center with the Jet Propulsion Lab in Sunnyvale. No chatter at this point, which is a good sign. People still watching their data. But all looked very good with the deploy of Magellan at about 6 hours, 14 minutes, 20 seconds mission elapsed time. Atlantis still retaining good lock with the Magellan through its payload interrogator, and that will continue for several nautical miles as the two spacecraft drift apart. And we're now coming up in about 12 and a half minutes on the separation burn that Atlantis will
shortly execute to move away from Magellan in preparation for the firing of the solid rocket booster aboard the inertial upper stage and the first real beginnings of the trip to Venus, which will take about 15 months.
You're listening to Dial-a-Shuttle coverage of the deployment of the Magellan spacecraft from the orbiter Atlantis. The deploy came just a few minutes ago and was successful. The mission controllers for the Magellan spacecraft continuing to monitor the data, and the crew of Atlantis will fire the OMS engines to separate the Atlantis from the Magellan IUS spacecraft combination, and that ignition coming up in about 11 minutes or so.
Also, Atlantis now in the burn configuration, burn attitude for the separation maneuver, coming up in about 3 minutes, 5 seconds.
Magellan probe to Venus on its way now after being deployed from the payload bay of Atlantis. Deploy came at 6 hours and 14 minutes into the flight at about 8:01 Central Daylight Time. Atlantis is now off the coast of South America, and it will be continuing on in just about 2 minutes from now. Atlantis will fire her orbital maneuvering system engines to separate from the Magellan IUS spacecraft. And we're currently waiting for data.
Yeah, we'll live with it for a while. Thanks. Okay, sounds good.
Looks like we just have a sensor problem with the cameras. Quick overview of what situation with the payload bay cameras. I just noticed that the sensors have detected some high temperatures, so the Capcom PR through it had indicated that the ground teams could send up an inhibit signal, but that might, of course, then interfere with any monitoring that the crew might want to do, given that they indeed wanted to turn on the cameras. So at this point, crew said, well, we'll live with it. We are about an hour, a little under. We're still monitoring the communications between Capcom PR and the crew in this post-deploy period. Magellan was successfully deployed at about 8:01 Central.
This is Mission Control Houston. The Flight Dynamics Officer here. Mission Control reports the distance separating the IUS Magellan stack from Atlantis is now 13.1 nautical miles. Shortly, Atlantis will be going to the window protect attitude in preparation for the burn of the inertial upper stage attached to Magellan.
We had a successful OMS burn confirmed about a half an hour ago. That OMS burn was initiated to move Atlantis away from the deploy area. The payload was deployed at about 8:01 p.m. Central Time, so we're talking about 45 minutes ago. So Magellan is now out of the Atlantis payload bay, and we are waiting for the inertial upper stage to begin its first burn. There will be 2 burns with this particular deployed vehicle.
This is Mission Control Houston at 6 hours, 59 minutes mission elapsed time. Atlantis moved outside of a distance separating the 2 spacecraft. Magellan and Atlantis separated now by more than 13.2 nautical miles. Therefore, control of Magellan has now been transferred to Sunnyvale flight by Houston Flight Director Milt Heflin. Sunnyvale responded, "Thanks for the ride, Houston," and Magellan concurred.
Sunnyvale is responsible for the payload operations for Magellan. So currently the Atlantis crew has delivered control of the Magellan and IUS combination to Sunnyvale. We are 7 hours into the mission, 45 minutes away from the, well, let's put it this way, it's 45 minutes since the deploy of Magellan. We are waiting, of course, then for the Atlantis to go in the windows away attitude. In other words, what they do is they move the windows away from the IUS, or initial upper stage, of Magellan combination. This is to protect the windows of the orbiter. That first stage burn of the IUS should come in about 20 minutes from now. Expect the second stage burn then to be about 2 minutes after that, and then truly Magellan will be on its way to Venus. Right now it'll be moving into a transfer orbit. We can expect a Magellan status briefing at about 10:30.
Atlantis Houston, have a question on tags for you.
Okay, we're listening.
And we noticed during activation that the developer had a jam. If you guys haven't already done so, we need you to run MAL 2.8 alpha, page 2-59 of the MAL book.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay, Pierre, when we activated it, it had the jam light. I advanced it once, the sheet came out, and the jam light went away. Has it subsequently jammed since that time?
Stand by.
What we have here is...
and Mark, we believe it has jammed since then.
We have a discussion on a jamming problem with the tags, or text and graphics system that will be used to, of course, send up data and material to the crew. It operates as a fax machine. Capcom here, so it is online right now, in contact with the mission specialist, Mark Leach, talking about this particular problem with the text and graphics system. That is one of the detailed test objectives on STS-30.
Atlantis Houston, how do you read?
Loud and clear now.
Okay, we'll be dropping in and out. We're getting close to Tedra's handover. We do need you to check that. That should have occurred after you've already advanced the paper. And we'll pick you up on Tedra's west at a time of 7 hours and 17 minutes.
Okay, Pierre, we'll see you there.
So we're 50 minutes into the deploy of the Magellan spacecraft. A few other developments have come up since that particular deploy. Just minor little irritants. Actually, there has been a little slight problem with the tags, or text and graphics system. They've noticed that the developer has been jamming. What we also have is some sensors kicking in, indicating that there's high temperature situations on the various payload bay cameras, and they believe that this is once again just a sensor problem and not really an actual indication of conditions. We're 7 hours into the mission, And we're going to be expecting in about an hour and a half from now a Magellan status briefing. So we expect then to be hearing from Project Manager John Gerfeide.
Hello, this is Jonathan Frakes, Commander Riker of the United Federation Starship Enterprise, reporting on the flight of Space Shuttle Atlantis for the National Space Society's Dial-a-Shuttle. This is the United States' 30th Space Shuttle flight, and it's the 4th time in orbit for Atlantis. She is commanded by Captain David Walker. Her pilot is Ronald Graby. Her 3 mission specialists are Mary Cleve, Norman Thagard, and Mark Lee. This flight is expected to last not longer than 4 days, and Atlantis will return to Earth at Edwards Air Force Base in California. In October, Atlantis will again go into space to launch NASA's Galileo spacecraft on its 5-year journey to Jupiter. Stay aboard Dial-a-Shuttle for more exciting news about Atlantis, Magellan, and the whole NASA space program. This is Jonathan Frakes.
1-3 being received from Magellan and IUS, also through Indy. And the orbiter Atlantis currently is at the proper window protect attitude. The position she will maintain throughout the inertial upper stage burn, coming up shortly for the IUS and the Magellan stack.
Atlantis is now currently on its ascending mode. It's going up towards the equator. Well, then it'll begin its 6th orbit. It's currently off the eastern coast of Madagascar. 52 minutes ago, Magellan was successfully deployed. And then about 13 minutes, or say 15 minutes ago, the sequence number 2 was complete. So what we're waiting for now, in, I'd say about 10 minutes, we're going to be having the first stage burn of the inertial upper stage, which will, of course, move Magellan into a transfer orbit. 2 minutes later, we can expect another burn, the second stage burn of the IUS, and then Magellan will then truly be on its way towards Venus. Dial-a-Shuttle is made possible by your call and by the National Space Society, a nonprofit membership organization supporting the space program. If you'd like to learn more about NSS or become a member, call 1-800-543-1280. That's 1-800-543-1280. Right now, you're called into, of course, 900-909 NASA, Dial-a-Shuttle, and we'll be here until just shortly after the crew goes to sleep, and then we'll be turning over to another shift. I'm Beverly Freed. With me is Mark Sonson, and we're awaiting some more communications between the orbiter, crew, and the Capcom Pierre Thuet. Shortly after Atlantis has deployed the payload, we're going to be getting some other experiments, some of them being some DTOs or detailed test objectives. Mary Cleve, prior to the mission, discussed some of the secondary payloads.
Now that Magellan has been deployed, Atlantis' crew is busy with so-called secondary payloads, scientific experiments, and equipment tests. Mission specialist Mary Cleve describes some of them.
Because we are performance limited, we don't have very many secondaries. We're going to have a furnace that we're going to grow crystals in, bismuth and selenium crystals. And that's really fun, and it's going to take more time because it's interactive. We change out samples. We actually set a melt rate. And we can monitor it and change it. That's going to keep us pretty busy. But we also, I hope, we'll have more time to look out the window, and that's why we're going to have more film on board.
We'll also be trying out the new compact video equipment.
Camcorder is an attempt to give us a user-friendly camera for in-cabin TV. And it's a little 8mm tape, and so it takes up a lot less storage than the orbiter VTR, which is half-inch. So if it works right, we'll be getting better inches inside with a more user-friendly camera that will also record for a quarter of the weight and mass and volume that we would in the old orbiter's TVs.
Mission Specialist Mary Cleve on some of the astronauts' other activities on this mission. I'm Pete Kappa, sir.
Hello, I'm Hugh Downs, and you're listening to Dial-a-Shuttle. This is being sponsored by the National Space Society, a non-profit membership organization. Its aim is to get more people interested in space exploration and to keep everyone up to date on the latest space news and discoveries. If you'd like to become a member of the National Space Society, which offers you a wide and wonderful opportunity to share in the exploration of the next frontier, call 1-800-543-1280 for more information. That's 1-800-543-1280.
And we're back live at the Johnson Space Center. This is Beverly Freed. With me is Mark Thonson. We are 7 hours and 10 minutes into the mission and about an hour and a half away from a Magellan status briefing.
Control Houston, inside 5 minutes now remaining before the inertial upper stage solid rocket motor ignition. Magellan flight confirms that an airborne ranging and instrumentation aircraft has been dispatched by the United States to that area over the Indian Ocean where the burn will take place, over which the burn will take place. And we hope to be able to confirm through the services of that aircraft telemetry that would give us some sense of the status of the burn, how it went, what its duration was. And we'll bring you that information that comes into the control center.
Just a few moments away from the the first stage burn of the inertial upper stage, which is carrying the payload Magellan. There will be two burns. One will be shortly after 9 o'clock Central Time, just a few moments away. The second one then will be 2 minutes later, and then the inertial upper stage will separate from Magellan and use some remaining fuel, some programmed commands to move out of the way of the payload so that there won't be any contamination or collision with the Magellan payload bay. And once the Magellan payload, and then once the clearance has been verified, the IUS will shut down, and Magellan, of course, will then be on its way. Atlantis is now beginning its ascending mode, going up towards the equator. At that point, it'll begin its 6th orbit, and we can expect communications between the Capcom Pierre Stewart and the crew shortly thereafter. Now over the Indian Ocean, making its pass up towards the equator.
Sunnyvale flight reports Araya acquisition of the Magellan IUS stack. Araya, again, is an acronym standing for Airborne Ranging and Instrumentation Aircraft, and that will be monitoring telemetry from the spacecraft during the IUS burn.
Yeah, you got some pictures right here.
IUS being inertial upper stage, that is the vehicle that will be used to boost Magellan out of Earth's orbit. There'll be two burns.
They did that.
One was just a few seconds away, and the other one will be about 2 minutes later. Magellan was deployed from the payload bay about an hour ago. That was successfully noted by mission specialist Mark Lee. Look here, about 6 hours into the mission. So we're Sunnyvale, the control of the spacecraft and the IUS Magellan combination has been transferred from Atlantis to the ground teams at Sunnyvale, and they have confirmed communication with the craft. So they will be monitoring the status and the condition of that first stage burn, which will come in just momentarily, just a few seconds away. Second stage burn will be 2 minutes after that. So we're going to be awaiting word confirming the first stage burn of the inertial upper stage. Dial-a-Shuttle is made possible by your calls and by the National Space Society. If you'd like to learn more about NSS or become a member, call 1-800-543-1280. And right now you're into 900-909 NASA, and we're awaiting word on the first stage burn of the inertial upper stage, which is carrying the Magellan's payload. Magellan was deployed about an hour ago. Sunnyvale now has reporting communication with the craft, so they will be monitoring the signal.
This is Mission Control Houston. Sunnyvale flight reports the SRM-1 burn aboard the inertial upper stage began at a mission elapsed time of 7 hours, 14 minutes. We're standing by for completion of the burn and a status report.
Yeah, it's burning.
Nominally, that burn is scheduled to last for 169 seconds.
They dispatched the C-130 communication plane over the Indian Ocean so they can get tracking confirmation down.
The first stage burn is now underway. It'll last probably about for another minute, and then we will have initiation of the second stage burn. So we did receive confirmation of the first stage burn just about 2 minutes ago. That burn started. So we should begin to the second stage burn now. So we're awaiting word and confirmation on the initiation of the second stage burn of the IUS Magellan spacecraft combination. And with the second stage burn, then Magellan will, of course, really be on its way to Venus by that point and be leaving Earth's orbit. And the IUS will be jettisoned after it maneuvers away from the Magellan payload, and then it will shut down. So we're still monitoring communications. It was a quick rundown of the events leading up to just a few moments ago. The IUS began drawing power. Sunnyvale, of course, announced this. That was about 2 hours, well, 2.5 hours ago, an hour and a half ago. The go for deploy came shortly after that. Then we had a confirmation of the umbilical separation, of course that meaning that the payload Magellan was then operating on its own power, and it had been separated from the orbiter. The tilt table.
Atlantis Houston with you now through Tidris West.
The tilt table was then moved.
And Dave and the rest of you folks, SRM-1 occurred on time and is complete.
That is wonderful.
Okay, and while it's still fresh in your minds, we'd like you to try to give us, if possible, an ascent debris report and the condition of your forward windows if you get a chance for that sometime.
So the solid rocket motor burn, number 1 for the inertial upper stage, has been successful.
We'll give you this kind of free association. Prior to SRB set, there were a couple of fairly large pieces of debris that seemed to come by the port side that were visible out my windows by both me and Ron. It looked as though there was quite a bit of debris associated with SRB set and a substantial flash. We do have a white film over all of our windows, predominantly on the forward pilot commander's windows, getting less as you work your way around towards the side windows.
Okay, Dave, we copy all
Was
that.
substantially, to those of us that have experienced more violent, although I hesitate to use that word because it still isn't a violent thing, but it wasn't the very soft separation that we thought we had previously remembered from the ET. And other than that, I don't think we have anything very significant to report. Just a little bit more activity than we expected.
Okay, Dave, we copied all that. Thanks.
Commander Dave Walker talking to Capcom Pierre Thuet. So we have a completion of the first solid rocket motor burn on the inertial upper stage. That confirmation came down. Then we are going to be receiving word shortly on the second stage burn. About an hour and a half from now, we're going to be having a Magellan status briefing with Project Director John Gerfeide. Prior to the STS-30 launch, John Gerfeide discussed one of the experiments on board Magellan. Through a technique known as radio interferometry, the signals received from Magellan will be used to detect and map flight irregularities in the orbit caused
SEP and SRM-2 ignition.
Well, we are as pleased as we can be about that.
Roger that.
So we have confirmation of the second stage burn.
Mission Control, Houston, unofficially we show the times for the initiation of the first solid rocket motor burn. First stage of the IUS was at 7 hours 14 minutes mission elapsed time, concluding at 7 hours 17 minutes MET. Following that, there was a good separation between the first and second stages on the IUS, with SRM-2 ignition beginning at 7 hours 20 minutes MET. Standing by for confirmation of the end of the second burn.
So we're awaiting word on confirmation of the second solid rocket motor burn of the inertial upper stage. Shortly after that burn, the inertial upper stage will then maneuver away from the Magellan spacecraft after it separates, and then it will then shut down once its remaining fuel has been depleted.
Atlanta Houston, SRM-2 complete.
SRM being a solid rocket motor. That's the second stage of the inertial upper stage. And that will be moving.
We're glad SRM-2 is complete, and while we realize that it's too early to tell about the major portion of Magellan's mission, we're very pleased that it's gone so well so far, and we're sure the JPL folks are happy. We're as happy as they are.
Roger that, Dave, and everybody else down here feels the same.
It's Commander Dave Walker expressing his feelings about the successful deploy of Magellan. So we have a completion of the second stage, the second SRM, solid rocket motor. So now Magellan is really and truly on its way to Venus. Now, although Venus is very much like Earth in size and mass, the veiled planet's rotation on its axis has several peculiar and unexplained differences, and this is one of the things that the crew wants to look at.
Maneuver to our next starline attitude if it meets with your approval.
Okay, stand by one day. Let me check on that.
I'm not following the jury or anyone. It's just, you know. They
Once
just
again,
have to
confirmation from Dave Walker about they're going to be once again doing some attitude calculations and verifications. Atlantis, of course, has moved.
Okay, Dave, you have a go for that.
Capcom peer through it. Atlantis is now off the...
Houston, Atlantis.
Go ahead, Jerry.
It appears after looking with a flashlight that we have a paper jammed pretty far back in tags, and it's going to be delicate, so we'll just wait till we get the two hands on, and that may not be tonight.
Okay, we understand.
We had developed, the crew had developed a bit of a problem with the tags or text and graphics system. This was announced about 40 minutes ago. It seems that the developer is jammed, and that was Mission Specialist Mary Cleve indicating to Pierre Thuet that the problem still existed and they weren't going to be doing anything about it tonight. So text and graphics system is one of the payload, the detailed test objectives on board Atlantis. And shortly before launch, there had been some discussion about the text and graphics system, and that was with Milt Heflin, the flight director. Of course, TAGS is not new to the space shuttle. It was, of course, used on previous missions. We're 7.5 hours into the mission. And payload was deployed about an hour and 11 minutes ago. We did receive confirmation that the second solid rocket motor of the inertial upper stage was successfully fired. Burns last for a little over 2 minutes. In about about an hour and a half from now, let's say 10:30 p.m. Central Time, we can expect a Magellan status briefing with the project manager, John Gerfeide.
CBS News, I'm Vicki Kelly. Main mission accomplished for the crew of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. We have a report from CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn at Florida's Kennedy Space Center.
Glee on Space Shuttle Atlantis following the successful beginning of the journey of the Magellan interplanetary probe to Venus. Mission Control reported.
We're taking some unscheduled television from the flight deck of Atlantis. Just before the picture signal was lost there momentarily, we saw Mark Lee and Mary Cleve on the aft flight deck. Mark Lee holding a sign that said Venus or bust.
Astronauts Lee and Cleve supervised the deployment of Magellan from Atlantis' cargo bay. Then, after the shuttle moved away, watched the deep space probe's own rocket fire to start it on its way. Wind down time for the crew now after a busy day that began with an hour delay to wait for the weather to improve before their own fiery launch more than 8 hours ago. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.